There can be no society without a shared memory of its history, where it has been, what are its core values and aspirations, who have been its architects. The Eminent Caribbean Jurists Awards was conceptualized in 2019 to recognize and celebrate those outstanding jurists who, by dint of their brilliance, hard work, and determination, have made a consequential contribution to Caribbean society. The 2021 installation of these awards pays homage to pioneering Caribbean women jurists who have built and are building the Caribbean society through their contributions to legal activism, adjudication, corporate governance, education, politics, and public service. These are women who have shattered glass ceilings and who have blazed an inspirational trail for the younger generation and indeed for all of us to follow.
These women, by virtue of their passionate advocacy and activism, have advanced our community.
Iris Brazao. On her passing in 1989, tributes to Iris Brazao described her as a pioneer and front-runner of women who dared to enter the exclusively male legal profession. Today, on discovering the legacy of this phenomenal woman, many would agree that these words only scratch the surface in describing her. Breaking gender stereotypes and challenging the structural inequalities of her time, Iris made a brave decision and took bold strides to become the first woman lawyer in the British Caribbean. Iris Brazao, an unsung heroine whose symbolic and significant achievements paved the way for any woman in the Caribbean to become a lawyer.
Before the year 1919, women were not allowed in the legal profession, and that view was endorsed in the case of Bebb and Law Society. And that was essentially an action that was initiated by a law student, Gwyneth Bebb, and three other women to get the Law Society to admit them to sit the preliminary examinations. And they were arguing that the word person in the Solicitors Act of 1843 included women. And the act expressly stated that reference to the masculine gender included the female gender. But the court nevertheless ignored that expressed statement in the act. The court ignored the text of the act and ruled that it was the inveterate practice of the centuries that women could not be lawyers. And that just, in my view, reinforces the deep-rooted prejudice that existed back then. After a protracted legal battle, the Parliament of the United Kingdom passed the Sex Disqualification Removal Act in 1919, and that act finally allowed women to become lawyers. It was in that very year that Iris Brazao began her journey to become a lawyer. It is significant because she is finally getting the recognition that she deserves. As I mentioned in the beginning, she is largely an unsung heroine. Many persons do not know about her. Even the older generation of lawyers who I would have spoken to when I was in the initial stages of conducting research, they do not know of her. And I found that surprising because I thought initially that I would have been able to make some sort of headway in asking the older generation of lawyers, but no one knew of her. The only newspaper article I could have come across was one that was written in 1989. So I think this awards ceremony, the PCWJ project, is incredibly important. It is of significant value in giving her the recognition that she deserves, and it also would prove as a source of inspiration for many young women lawyers in the Caribbean as well, because she is the one who paved the way for all of us to now become lawyers. And to that, we are very grateful to her. At that time, in the early 1900s, becoming a woman lawyer in then British Guyana and the Caribbean was uncharted territory. It had not been done before, and that is owed to the traditional and cultural barricades of deep-rooted prejudice that existed back then. That obstructed gender equality, it obstructed the empowerment of women, and it stood in the way of a woman's independence and professional development. Any path essentially that did not align with the customary gender roles was viewed by society with the utmost disapproval. At that time, a woman's place was in the home, taking care of children, greeting her husband with dinner when he comes home from work. Certainly becoming a lawyer was not something that was thought about by many women, and stepping out of that traditional path required strength, it required determination, it required resilience, and times that by 100 when you couple that with being a woman of color, like Iris Brazao was. Her father was Portuguese and her mother was Barbadian. So not only would she have faced prejudice on the basis of gender, but she would have also faced prejudice on the basis of race. So for her, in my eyes, and I'm sure in the eyes of many who would now know her story, being able to dare that path to become a lawyer is just a testament of her bravery and her pioneering spirit. Initially, the thought of becoming a lawyer never crossed her mind. She wanted to become an actress. That was her childhood dream. She was fondly described by many as very quiet, very private, and reserved. It was actually her brother, Stanley MacDonald de Freitas, who became a lawyer first. But initially, she wanted to fulfill her childhood dream, and that was fueled by her study of the arts at what is now called St. Rose's High School in Guyana. But she soon discovered that she would probably not be a good actress because she had stage fright. And interestingly enough, when she was cast her first role, she was cast the role of a lawyer. So I found that very interesting when doing my research. It was actually later in life that she was encouraged by her father, Manuel. He inspired her to become a lawyer. And with the encouragement, with the reassurance that she received from Manuel, Iris Brazao decided to follow her brother Stanley into the profession. In terms of the First World War, well, her plans to study law were prevented by the First World War. But in the interim, she decided to further her education. She did not sit back, she did not relax, she did not decide to give up. She did something in the interim to keep her mind occupied. So she studied very briefly for 6 months at the University of Toronto. She studied general studies. And when the First World War ended, she wasted no time. The legal profession at that time had become more open to women. Many young women in the UK were seizing that opportunity to become lawyers. And Brazao from then British Guyana was similarly eager to become her legal studies, and she left in 1918 to study law. After she completed her studies in the UK, she returned to Guyana, and one of her first jobs was temporary legal assistant to the Attorney General's chambers in 1933. In that year, she also became the secretary to the British Guyana Franchise Commission, where she would have been involved in advising on important matters, including suffrage, qualifications for election, and membership to the Legislative Council. In 1934, she was appointed a Crown Prosecutor, and that is also equally memorable and significant because she is the first woman prosecutor of a murder trial in the Caribbean. And her appointment, soon after her appointment, she had her first case, and her first case was a trial for murder. And she once again, she for the first time won her case. So that was memorable in two ways. One, she was the first woman prosecutor of a murder trial, and two, she actually was able to win her case. Other than being involved in strictly legal matters, she was also heavily involved in service. She recognized the importance and the value of being in service to others. So her life wasn't just streamlined in the legal field. She was part of the formation of the British Guyana Workers' League, and that league would have concentrated its activities in representing the interests of factory workers and municipal workers in Georgetown. She served on the British Red Cross Society, aiding in activities to provide humanitarian service as well. And she was also a member of the Public Service Commission and an aide-de-camp to the governor in public service affairs. She was notably very much involved in public service. I found that in her biography, what kind of set it apart from the others is that it was very important to give it a historical context, because I felt like I wanted people to understand how truly monumental this achievement was. Not only was she a woman in the early 1900s trying to become a lawyer, she was a woman of color trying to become a lawyer. And I really thought it was important to give a background of everything that happened from the First World War to BEB and the Law Society, from the unyielding statement that women could not be lawyers, even though the relevant statute expressly stated that the masculine gender is meant to include the female gender. So yes, I thought a historical context was very important in her biography.
Justice Ena Collymore Woodstock. Described as a Caribbean icon who gave distinguished service in the Jamaican and Caribbean judiciary, Ena Collymore Woodstock, now 104 years old, was recently discovered to be the British Army's oldest surviving female veteran, serving from 1943 to 1946 in both the United Kingdom and Belgium as a first black female radar operator. A recipient of the Order of the British Empire and a recipient of Jamaica's Order of Distinction, particularly in the legal field, Justice Collymore Woodstock leaves an enduring legacy through her active involvement in public service, education, and social work.
She has 3 grandchildren that are lawyers, but Spencer, in summing her up, one of his quotes was that she wasn't repressed to the confines of gender stigmas, racial prejudices, and societal limitations. And it's interesting that even though as a young man, he is able to see the qualities of his grandmother. And she began her life 1917, her schooling, her career, at a time certainly when there were limitations on what a woman could do, what a person of color could do. And so there were considerable limitations, and it was very interesting from an early stage. She did not see limitations, she did not see barriers, and that is something that did take her throughout her life. And when she was honored by the Jamaica Bar Association, one of the things she said was that you shouldn't see barriers in life, you should see opportunities and grab them. And certainly that is what she did throughout. So the traits that she had, she likes challenges. She knew what she was capable of. She knew her abilities. She knew what she wanted, and she did what she wanted. And so she didn't see limitations, and that's certainly something that she has passed on. And it's interesting that you can see that she didn't do it as a statement that I am the first woman or I am Black doing this. And a lot of those firsts were only recently discovered. And that's because she didn't speak about them. So it was achievements, not a statement within that context, but just her natural personality. Very, very, very pleased. Very pleased, especially to be among the number of women that are mentioned there. Dame Eugenia Charles was one of her friends from many years ago. And she, again, it's very important. It's a very important project from the point of view of inspiration, recognition. And I know many of those women were simply doing what they were doing, but we don't realize the effect that they have on persons' lives. We ourselves, I think it's only when you have awards like these that we started looking at her life. We just, to us, she was mom, and we grew up that way. And it's only as you get older that you realize she is the living example of teaching by action, not by words. And I think many of the women within this book do the same. So it's not a question of lecturing to people or do this, do that. And that's something she didn't do. As a parent myself, sometimes I wonder if that was a wise thing. But it worked. She did not, give directions. She lived by example, and we learned by example. Well, in one sense, she wanted to join the civil service. And at that time, the civil service was one area that was available, opportunities for persons. So that was one reason she applied. The job was advertised for a male clerk. And again, I think she advertised in her spirit of not seeing limitations. She was a tomboy. She was the youngest girl in the family, and she and her brother were the youngest. And she grew up with him, playing with his friends. So she was a bit of a tomboy. I think it was good that she didn't see men as different, but as equals. And she took that spirit. So again, I think she applied. It's something she thought she could do. So she applied, not, to make a political statement, but she didn't see any reason why she couldn't. She did, and she got the job. Her service as a radar operator in the war, we knew about, but it was never considered anything significant. And it was only, and again, because she didn't make an issue of it. So we knew that she was a radar operator in the war. But in terms of the first this or that, that's not something she mentioned. And it was only recently when she was discovered as the oldest female World War II veteran of the British Army that it then came up. Well, we knew she had gone to Brussels, but the significance of the fact that she was just behind the enemy lines. She saw active service. At one of her birthday parties, one of the ladies who had gone to England with her, I think that's the first we started thinking about it, pointed out that they were assigned to the office and they were all content to be there, but Justice Ena was not. And so she wrote and said that she didn't come all this way to go into an office. And that's again her spirit and the way she approached things. So certainly in Jamaica, that would not even be known. It is not considered, and it's only recently. And we as a family as well, unfortunately, did not give the significance to it that we are now realizing. Her greatest contribution to the legal field is simply her existence and what she did in terms of being the first woman at the time to sit on the bench in Jamaica. And just this simple example of what is possible. And that really is her greatest contribution. And perhaps her contribution can be seen in those that followed her. And we've really been humbled as a family when we've spoken, for example, the first female Chief Justice of Jamaica, or recently Jackie Samuels Brown, a Queen's Counsel, eminent Queen's Counsel from Jamaica. And when they speak of the effect on her that she had when they knew of her as a young woman. So we would say, first off, her greatest contribution is the example that she set. In the actual legal field, within the court office, I think was her attention to detail, and I think that has been spoken about throughout, the way that she brought order out of chaos. So she went into the court office and certainly developed systems, etc. That has been spoken about. Within the actual, the legal field, she certainly was very involved in the juvenile court and the chair of the juvenile court, and the approach that was taken to juveniles and the change in that approach, and how we should deal with children who had been in trouble. And it was certainly a very holistic approach and a different approach at the time, and very important. And again, one of the important things for us is the number of adult persons who would then come and tell you how she changed the trajectory of their life. When we would drive to the country in Jamaica, she would always stop at juvenile detention centers or where juveniles, and meet with persons that she had dealt with in court. And again, those are persons who would speak of her after and how she affected them. So both in the law and in terms of how the individuals are addressed. And further afield, she certainly got involved in things like the establishment of the family court in Jamaica, a woman's desk, various issues which now it perhaps hard for people to understand that this was an issue, but equal pay, equal opportunity for promotion. Those were things that she had to deal with. And it was not confined to women or girls. There were boys, for example, in Jamaica at the time, boys would sell and not be in school. So she addressed issues like that. The Status of Children Act, she was fundamental in having that passed. And that certainly was the benefit of men, women, boys, and girls. And how children were treated, and that children have an opportunity. And again, that's something that she's taken through her life. And she certainly looked at everyone equally. And this is regardless of race, gender, social standing. And she brought that to her work. But her passion certainly was children, and that can be seen in her legal work, in her work in Soroptimism, in her work in Girl Guides. And again, the contribution of her contribution was not just for women and what women could see. But I remember once when she was transferred to courthouse in the country. And one of the men there later told us how they had planned for her, that they heard this woman was coming. And so they had planned to give her a hard time. And of course, when she came, between her charm and her work ethic, she won them over. And I use that as an example that her effect was not only on women and women in the legal profession, but also men, and on how they viewed women. Bearing in mind, it's again hard for us to think about it now when it is so dominated by women, but at the time, being the first woman in many areas. She had a tremendous impact in the Turks and Caicos Islands and in Anguilla. And again, it's amazing that so many years later, people still speak of her in those islands. In the sense of her actual work within the courts, again, her attention to detail and the organization that she brought to the courts, her interest in children, and the fair-handed way in which she dealt with them. She also, very interestingly, at the time, there would have been a somewhat of a segregation between expats and locals. And she was in one sense an expat, but not your typical expat. And with her personality, she was able to bring people together, whether through her work in Seroptimus, her bridge games and her bridge parties. So she certainly bridged the divide in many ways within those islands. And it is, people speak about it in terms of the requirement for men to support their children. I don't know what was happening before, but that is something that people still speak about. And literally you can go there and people are still mentioning her and the impact that she had on men taking responsibility for their children. And I think we gave the example of going there for a conference and a man simply turning up at the hotel and saying that she had sentenced him. Mm-hmm. And he just wanted to see her and thank her and felt we were a little nervous, but again, it's the impact that she has had on persons. That's really tremendous. There you go, 104.